All right, what's up, everybody? I hope everybody's good. Listen, about 2 to 3 weeks ago, Dr. Cologne invited a gentleman. His name is Marcel Durden. He happens to be a dance historian. What I know about him, he's well versed in dance history. He gives lectures, he gives dance lessons all around the world. Well respected in those arenas, right? And so Dr. Cologne invited him on his platform, basically, I think for two reasons. First reason is to dispel the idea that when we see the brothers in, let's say for the Mills Brothers video where the guy's doing breakdance moves, and brothers like Charles Buckner or Conrad Buckner who's doing his floor moves, we shouldn't look at those things as breaking and or proto breaking, as if they're distinctly different. And so he brought him on basically to deliver that message that what was done in the 70s, we should not associate that with what was done in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. The second reason why I think he brought him on is to preach this unity message and basically to suggest that this hip hop thing was created as a multicultural thing. And so why do I think DEI plays a role in this? The definition of DEI, how it's defined today, is like you're in position that you're not qualified or you have no right to be in. And so the multicultural theme suggests that everybody played an equal role. And when you look at the history, that's not true. And so what Marcel is doing here in his presentation, and he had 2 interviews, and he wants to basically offer this opinion that why are people claiming anything? Let's just enjoy it, and it doesn't even matter. The main thing is that we all come from the same African ancestry. That is his overall message. And so I just found it interesting that when he gave his demonstrations, all he would show is Black dancers, and he didn't even show any Latino dancers. And so I wonder, how do you say something was created multiculturally when the history of dance is rooted in Black American culture? Needless to say, that's what he did. And so what I'm going to do, there were 2 interviews, right? I'm going to take clips from both interviews, and I'm going to dissect them, and we're going to talk about them. I'm going to give you my take on what I think the overarching message is and what I think about it. Okay? So let's get to it.
I'm not for this side or that side. To me, Blacks and Puerto Ricans, if you want to go with the term Black, come from the same heritage line.
Absolutely.
We're together in this. And I think the languaging is becoming a problem. And even for the debates I've seen between yourself, Tariq, Mahat, and even Truth, you all are, in some ways, you're supporting the same thing, but you're coming from different perspectives. And then the languaging that you all are using is causing a divide, I believe. But for the most part, y'all are sort of saying the same thing, but no one's listening.
All right, so you heard him say that he's not for either side. But as you listen to these clips, you can clearly see his bias. So Marcel said that he believes we're all speaking or all agreeing to some extent. Cologne, of course, disagree, and I disagree. We're not saying the same thing. So I'm going to take a clip from the second interview Cologne did with Marcel, where Cologne wanted to address that, what Marcel said about we're all saying the same thing.
Let me address this. From the last time we were together, I just wanted to address something that you had made mention of, and I wanted to just sort of bring some clarity on it. And you said you would also bring some clarity on it. So you had mentioned that when it came to me, Tariq, maybe even Truth, that we were basically saying the same things. We were just kind of saying them in different ways. And I respectfully, disagree with that statement. And I'll tell you why. because my position is as follows. My position is that hip hop culture was created, influenced, inspired by Black Americans, New Yorkers, Caribbeans in the Bronx in the 70s. Their position is that hip hop culture was created, inspired, and innovated by foundational Black Americans only. At its inception, it is Black culture at its root, and that Caribbeans and New Yorkers did not have anything to do with it until years later. So I think we're definitely saying two different things. We're not saying the same thing. While we can agree that, the root, for me, the root is Africa to the Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean. That's the foundation of all. But when it comes to the culture of hip hop, where it began and who was the major players, I think we're definitely saying something different. And I think they would even say, no, we ain't saying what Cologne is saying. But so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of clear that up because people were kind of wondering,
What I meant.
whether I changed my something, but yeah,
No.
talk to me a little bit about it today.
I think the thing is this, what I mean to clarify, what I mean by that is that there are pockets, spaces in the lineage where you all are agreeing, but you're agreeing from different sides. So let me clarify. All of this, if you want to say Black Americans, Latino, New Yorkers, all of this is connected to African culture. We both come out of the African diaspora. So when you look at the influence for the Southern Islands is going to be, Portugal. When you look at Brazil, it's going to be French. It's going to be Spaniards. Right? When you look at who was conquering what land and whose language dominated, whose cultural practices are fused in. And so Africans who were enslaved were taken to the Southern Islands first. They either stayed there, most of the Africans were taken to South America. They either stayed there or some were shipped here. But they all went there first. There's a few ships that in the journal said that they came straight here, but not many.
Right.
Everyone went through the islands first before they get them. They got them accustomed to culturized to then come here. So the mixing starts there. When you talk about, I'm probably going to bounce around here a bit, but when you talk about like the cowbells, I don't have them up.
And I don't want this to to throw you off your rhythm. I just wanted to say that. I don't want to make this the main point. I want you to get to I want you to cook.
This is part of it. Just call it the spices. This is part of it. It's all creating a gumbo, so it's all in there. But just to think about, to understand, I think where, and probably not just the FBA community, but let's just using this community as an example. I think where they seem to be getting lost in is the idea that something is solely American without having any connection to the diaspora is kind of ridiculous. Everything is connected through. Like I said before, you don't lose your culture just because you've been displaced or been imprisoned or what have you. Mm-hmm. Your culture is still with you. So you take that with you. And then once it gets to a new place, it can then develop with some new ideas. But it is still situated and rooted in what came before. There's a woman named Cheryl Willis who has a really incredible quote that I like from a conference she went to in, I want to say 1990. And in the quote, she says,
the deep-rooted structure of a culture is found in the retentions of the characteristics of behavior that are not bound by time and geography. That surface structure is bound by time and geography. So what is she saying? That just because we think about deep-rooted structure and surface structure, just because something, it's not bound by time and geography. So it doesn't matter where you go, that deep-rooted structure stays with you. And then that's what we see when it came to the Americas.
He's right. We don't agree. But this speaks to Moncel's desire for unity, right? And so he's trying to see where we agree. And unfortunately, we don't. Nevertheless, there's one thing that he did say that was interesting, and it goes to show that he knows very little bit about where Cologne stands in terms of how he views Black Americans and their heritage. Because when I had to debate with him, he said that the African Americans lost their Africanism because they lost the drums. They came here with nothing. Moncel is saying, no, that's not true. We did retain, not to the degree that was going on in Cuba or Puerto Rico, but we did maintain. That's evident by the fact that we developed a lot of different rhythms here in America. The rhythms that we lost playing the drums were transformed or transferred into other mechanisms or other instruments, all right? So the idea that we had nothing or we lost everything that is Africa is a lie. He spoke to retention. There's a thing called transgenerational trauma. And so that they use that when a group of people go through horrific circumstances and certain trauma is encoded in the DNA of the people. And so Black Americans suffer the trauma like most African people all around the world who were enslaved. A lot of things that are African still resides in our DNA. We never lost it. So this is what Moncel talking about retention. That goes against Dr. Cologne's philosophy in terms of what Black Americans brought to the table.
We're attached to these things in a way where we're not willing to be objective about them. Yeah. And I think that's problematic. And I think that the ways in which, because I've had these internal arguments with myself in terms of what I was then calling my cultural identity with my humanity. And my cultural identity was like, why is this other cultured people doing a dance that comes from my culture? Why aren't you doing your own dance? But that's a larger discussion. But in the grand scheme of it, I want my humanity to win that argument because we don't own language. I don't care. You can be born in Puerto Rico. You don't own that language. First of all, it's a colonized language, but we don't own the language. If we have the mental capacity to learn to speak another language, we can do that. You can't stop a human being from speaking another language. You don't own it. And whether you want to argue this or not, you don't own the dance either. Like it may be a dance that is from this culture and these people and they do it for this reason, but they don't own that no more than they own the language that they speak because other people can learn it. Now, that does speak to a level of reverence for those people and that cultural practice. And that's where we might have some issue if there's a lack of reverence. But bringing it all back.
Now, this is clearly an area where I agree with Moncel. Where is the reverence? When it comes to breaking history, there is no reverence given to the Black B-boys that came before the Latinos. There's really a whole bunch of disrespect. And so, unlike them, we acknowledge what the Puerto Ricans did. We give them their reverence, but it's not reciprocated. And so that becomes the problem. we don't mind sharing. We're not trying to be divisive. But when you act as if we didn't do something, or you pretend that we didn't do something, and we know that we did, that's a problem. All right? This is where the pushback comes from. If you just gave proper respect and acknowledged what was done previously, there would be no problem.
Why do you think that
Drinking warm water before bed helps.
Sorry, I was on my email. Go ahead.
that's okay. Why do you think that people want these clips to be hip hop? Because we don't have footage from the 70s of these early, breakers. So my thing is it because of that they just have to have something to say, but look, this is what we do have? What are your thoughts? I don't know.
I mean, I can't speak to what an individual's intentions are, but what I can say in and around that subject is that it is my belief that, and not to make this about ethnicity, but for many people who identify as Black, because of the vast contributions coming from Black people, African Americans, African, whatever language you suits you best, because of the dismissal and the denial of those contributions, that people of the community feel, well, this is helping to claim something.
Absolutely.
And so I kind of understand that, but there's still a way that we need to be objective about how we have this discussion. It's not that, no pun intended, it's not that black and white. But I think it's that this gives proof of it. And it doesn't, I don't know if it gives proof. It definitely shows that this movement was being done, but this movement didn't begin there. And that movement has a lineage and a heritage. And instead of being fixated on what it does for the 70s and to support the narrative of that time, I think it's more important that we look at the lineage of it and how that says, instead of, see, this is mine or ours, this says this is not new. We have been doing this. So when you say and try to dismiss what we do as a fad, as it's in today, out tomorrow, no, this is part of heritage. And look at the lineage. And then we can start to understand the shifts. We can start to understand the morphology of it. What the dance of the Yankee was not the same as what the Charleston is. There was a whole other ritual in place as to why you did that. But because of the morphing of it, because of the migration of it, we lose bits and pieces, and we oftentimes lose the context, and we develop new understanding. We create new context to fit the whatever the now is in that time period. And so it becomes something else. It has it's situated in this thing before it, but it has now developed into something else. And we're not looking at that to give value to the deep-rooted structure of it. We're just concerned about proving a point in the 70s. I'm like, y'all are missing the point. Y'all are arguing over something that you don't even need to argue.
Yeah.
And why they're arguing in the way that they're arguing, I don't know.
Yeah, no.
And they're like looking at what we do now. It's just the da-da-da-da. No, it's not. It's not what we called it. It's breaking.
Right.
Or it's whatever it is, because that's what it was for us. And then the context behind why it's called what it's called, that gets lost. So for all these people who are looking at the jazz stuff and not taking the time to actually find out and learn and ask, what is that dance? What are they doing? And then you can put it out and be like, this looks like what we're doing, But it's not. Even in my documentary, Frankie Manning, one of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, and when I interviewed, he was like, yeah, a lot of the stuff that we were doing back then, these kids are doing now. And he goes on to say, it's like, nothing's new under the sun.
I had to laugh when Cologne asked Marcel that question. That we're basically, why are we trying to claim these dances from the 30s and 40s? He almost, the way he asked that question is almost, he was trying to imply that somehow we're desperate, as if we have nothing, and we're just looking for anything to grab onto. Cologne is projecting. He's talking about himself and his people, who, if you measure the accomplishments and compare, they're the ones who are lacking in accomplishments. And I don't mean to be mean, but that's just a fact. This is why they're fighting so hard for breaking, because they want to be able to claim something. So when he asked Marcel that question, he's projecting. Why are you fighting so hard, Dr. Cologne, for breaking? Answer that question. Why are you denying the history of the dance? Because it was created by Black Americans? That's why you're denying it? Let's be honest here. This is why you're fighting to make this thing a Puerto Rican creation. Everybody knows that TBB wasn't the first crew, or foundational crew as you call them. So you're lying to your people, making this stuff up. Here's the other thing that Cologne didn't count on. Marcel don't know my position, but Marcel basically agreed with me on this particular point, which is the dance is a continuum. There's a lineage to the dance from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. There's a lineage to it. The breaking dance did not develop in 1975.
And we've talked about this a bit. A lot of people like to look at the old jazz footage and say, whatever they want to say, that's the pre-hip hop, or that's breaking, or that's whatever. Here's the actual thing. If anything, hip hop would be the new jazz before jazz would be the old hip hop or the original hip hop. They were doing that first. And that's under the jazz idiom, which means anything that comes after it is connected to that, not the other way around. You don't look at jazz stuff and be like, they're breaking. No, you look at breakers and be like, y'all are doing jazz, if you're going to have an argument like that. I'm not saying that's what it is or how we should define it. Breaking is breaking, jazz is jazz. But if you're going to try to compare and using that language, it's the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Cologne doesn't believe what Marcel just said right there. But you notice he didn't confront him on that. Cologne doesn't believe that. Cologne believes that breaking has nothing to do with jazz. There is no connection. But he didn't challenge him. He left it alone. I wonder why.
This culminations of structures that then then end up coming to America and then developing separately but together. And I say that because while you have the Palladium, which was predominantly Puerto Rican, and you have the Savoy Ballroom, just to use one of the clubs in Harlem, while you have predominantly Black, Savoy Ballroom being the only ballroom at the time that was fully integrated, so you could be from anywhere and go there. But then a little bit later, I think in the late 40s, early 50s, the Palladium opens its doors to Blacks. So now you got Blacks going to Palladium, you got Puerto Ricans going to Savoy. You have this mixture. Even when you do Lindy Hop, there's a step in Lindy Hop called the Mambo. Now, is it a traditional Mambo step? Not really, because I know Mambo. Mambo is actually what salsa is. Salsa comes from the Mambo. They just took 2 steps out of the Mambo, and then they dealt with the steps in the middle, and that became salsa. And even when Fire All Stars was playing, they was like, this is the night we're going to dub it salsa. The dance that people were doing was the Mambo, but then they flipped it after the Fire All Stars, that concert. So it's a coming together. It's not a this one over that one. It is a coming together, and in the deep structure, we're together. Now, people want to make all the other arguments they want, but the timelines don't. You can't start and stop a timeline where they're suggesting.
Now, here's another instance where Marcel says something that's contradictory to Cologne. This proves that Marcel hasn't watched a lot of Cologne videos, because Cologne has said that breaking started in 1975. He just says you can't start and stop a timeline. That's what Cologne did with breaking. He said 75. So, but Marcel thinks he's speaking to us, that we're creating timelines. But he's actually speaking to Cologne. Cologne is not saying, well, breaking did start in 75, Marcel. He kept quiet because he wants Marcel to think that we're the dividers and not Cologne himself.
Yeah, I'm slightly entertained when I see all these, but I'm just like, I don't get it. I don't get it.
Well, let's transition. Let's transition to the documentary, The Latin Breakdown. We talked about that. We were also going to speak a little bit about this. I was definitely open and curious on your thoughts. You did watch it, and take me through your thoughts on it. I'll just leave it there.
Well, I certainly enjoyed it. I loved I love the way you put some of the things together to let the people speak for themselves. I thought it was two things. I thought it was quite interesting that I believe it was Truth who had something to say against what Dizzy Gillespie said.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty bold statement. Like, I know I'm not being clear because I don't remember the details of it, but I do remember, and I believe it was Truth.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was Truth. But he was saying Dizzy was giving his own account of what something was.
Mm-hmm.
But then Truth, or whoever this person was like, Dizzy was wrong. How you going to tell Dizzy was there? You weren't even born, probably. But Dizzy was there, and even if you were born, you wasn't there. So Dizzy is telling you of his account, and you're going to tell Dizzy is wrong?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds crazy to me. Now, one could say, well, maybe Dizzy was wrong. All right, but that's his account of what he knows it to be. But I thought that was interesting, that was the conversation. But I also like the interview with Jimmy Castor that you pulled from the other interview that Jimmy Castor did. And he was talking about what his personal influences were. I think that is a key thing to look at, especially if you're going to watch Tariq's film, Microphone Check. Because again, to show clips from 80 Blocks from Tiffany's, toward the end of 80 Blocks from Tiffany's, when they were having a block party, but you don't show the Puerto Ricans and the Italians and the Jewish people that were at that block party, you don't show them. Then we need to understand, like, from Harlem to the Bronx, Tito Puente and the Fania All-Stars and all, like there were block parties out there. To have the interview with Jimmy Castor saying that the influence that the Timbales had on him and that he had to have that in there, to you playing and letting people listen to the timbales that are being played in the breaks with Curtis Blow. I'm like, those are key things, and I'm like, you why are we trying to dismiss that? And it begs the question, if the argument is if the argument is Black people created it, and we know Puerto Ricans were there, the argument then becomes, all right, let's look at the census.
All right, you just heard Marcel mention my name, and he was pretty disgusted by my response to Dizzy Gillespie. Listen, I wasn't trying to be cocky or disrespectful to Dizzy Gillespie. He just so happens to be wrong. So I actually called Marcel after I saw that interview. I found him on Instagram, and I called him up, and we spoke about it, and I explained to him that it's possible that Dizzy Gillespie wasn't aware of a bass player named Jimmy Blanton who preceded China Pozo almost by 10 years, who wasn't playing the standard walking bass line. So I brought that to his attention so he wouldn't think that I was being cocky. I'm just trying to get the history correct. And so another thing that he mentioned, he thinks that we're trying to basically not acknowledge the existence of these instruments. And we're not doing that. What we're pushing back against, whether or not these instruments were essential to creating our genres. Because that is Cologne's position. He believes that once you present these instruments within our music, that's evidence of a collaboration. And therefore, he feels that Latin culture should get credit for their particular, as he would see it, participation and collaboration within our music genres. I flatly reject that because I liken it to, let's say, orchestration in music. Think about the groups like in the 70s, the Delphonics, Shy Lights, Blue Magic. The list goes on. Heavy on orchestration. But that in no way detracts from the fact that the music was created by Black Americans without the collaboration of Europeans. We use the ideal of Europeans, but the music at its root and foundation is Black Americans or Black America. So let's be clear. We're not trying to eliminate the existence of these instruments, but we're not going to allow someone to say that if it were not for these instruments, our music would not be the way it is today.
It started snowing. I don't know what was going on. But,
Okay.
But yeah, I'll stop there because I'm kind of ranting now.
No. It was good. I was really encouraged. I got to speak to Brother Unk from Dr. Mayat's show.
Yeah.
He's actually going to be showing the Latin Breakdown on Friday on his show, and
Okay.
we spoke, and he said he loved it, and he said how can you argue with what's clearly presented? I mean, you're showing evidence, you're giving examples, and that was really encouraging, right? And so I think the only person that really gave it some flack was Truth, but it is what it is, and it is what it is, and so I'm proud of the work. I'm glad people enjoyed it, and we're working on the docu-series, which I already did part one, which was exploring the Latin breakdown, the Latin rhythms in early rap. And so we did part one. We're working on part two now, which would be hip hop's Latin heartbeat, and we're gonna go over, go through the b-boy anthems and all of that. But I think, it was a lesson learned, and obviously, want to get better at doing it. And so yeah, I think I was encouraged by the. I'm gonna be honest with you. I wasn't sure how you were gonna critique it.
Me, I'm still going to do a little something.
Yeah.
Let me say something quickly about this particular clip. Cologne continually makes the claim that there are Latin rhythms in our music. Our music is basically funk based. There are no Latin rhythms in our music. All right? So he falsely makes this claim. I actually did a video featuring Sheila E., who broke it down. Latin rhythms are based on the clave, the 3-2 or the 2-3 rhythm. That is absent in our music. So what does that mean? If it's absent, that means there are no Latin rhythms. All right? They're just funk rhythms. So if you take a percussion and you play, not a percussion, but you take a conga or bongo, you play a rhythm to a funk beat, that rhythm is a funk rhythm. It is not a Latin rhythm. So this is the false nonsense that he continually spread. All you got to do is look at my video on Sheila E. She breaks it down. She said her father told her to throw the clave out the window if you're going to play funk music.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, y'all are so worried about the messenger, you missing the message. And like,
That's good.
yeah, there is, for people who feel like their contributions have been dismissed, I totally understand that. But nothing has, and in my personal opinion, can bring people, cross-pollinated people together like music.
That's
like
right.
Music and dancing. There's a deeper conversation around vibration and rhythms and tonality and pitch and such. But hip hop is doing that. You know, you look at Battle of the what is it, B-Boy Planet, the documentary, and you know, these breakers who are going to Battle of the Year, they're from all over the world. And you see them in the documentation eating food that they've never ate, exchanging currency because they're not from this country, that country. They don't speak the same language, but they can dance. They're you know, it's bringing people together. So the fact that there are individuals so hung up on who that they would rather destroy or conquer and divide than see the magnificent thing that has been created. Because and it's you can argue a lot of these things and debate a lot of these things, but like, you know, I was talking this earlier with Wynot about identity and how we as human beings have a tendency to attach ourselves to we let identity define us. And it doesn't define us. We define the thing more than the thing defines us. So it's not that I'm a pianist or I'm a guitarist. I'm a human and I play the guitar. I define that instrument. I am what makes that instrument an instrument. Other than that, if you make it and nobody plays it, it's nothing.
Right.
And the level in which they play it makes it even a greater thing. So I'm defining it more than it defines me. But
have you noticed he has all the smoke for the FBA community? And clearly he has no idea who Cologne is. He's the one claiming stuff. You know, he's doing more claiming of our culture than we ever did to his culture. But because he doesn't know Cologne presents himself as a good guy. And people like myself and Tyreek, we're the bad guys. You know, so he has some smoke for us. You know, talking about the unity message. Again, DEI. Everybody's equal. Let's share everything. And when we do that, we lose. Everybody erases us as the creators. He ought to know that. That's what's happening with Lindy Hop. Created by Black Americans. Now, some white people who are participating or learning to dance today, all they ever saw were white people. They think white people created the Lindy Hop. You got to remind people who created this thing. Because if you allow everyone to come to the table, guess what's going to happen? They're going to forget about you. They're going to forget about the originator or the creator. Now, he said something interesting against Cologne. Cologne didn't push back. He had no idea Cologne believes that an instrument by itself is an influence. He just said an instrument is nothing until someone plays it. An instrument is not culture. The person is culture. How many times have I been saying that? Cologne ain't hearing that message. And he didn't challenge Monsell on that.
Right. Look at your screen. Truth Teacher, he says, that's what I keep telling them. They want to say they created everything without any other cultural influences.
Yeah, that's impossible. That's impossible. Because the collection is there. And I mean, like, even when you think about ragtime music, right? And I apologize if I'm bouncing, but it's so, the conversation is so vast. I just want to go to key pinpointed places so that people can take this information, they can do some research for themselves. I'm not asking of anybody to believe everything that comes out of my mouth. I know what I'm saying to be correct because of my research and study. I also know that I don't know everything, so there could be spaces where my stuff is off. But from me, take whatever you want to take and go do some research on your own. Now, what I was saying was, to what Truth was saying, Ragtime music. We know ragtime music to be syncopated because Africans, and I'm gonna say Africans because just because they're born here, that doesn't separate you from your lineage or your heritage. You don't suddenly become something else, but your family structure is, if your family structure is Italian all the way back, you don't suddenly become French. Like, no, it's still Italian, it's still there. So when you look at what ragtime music is, African sensibility and structure that gives us a rag beat, a syncopated beat, which some people call ragging the beat in the 1800s. That is influenced by Philip Sosa's march time music. So like the Star Spangled Banner is a march song. Musicians were using that as a sort of a template, but then they were playing it by ragging the beat, adding that African sensibility, which gives us ragtime. Some people use the term in a derogatory way. I don't think this was popular speech, but some people would say that it was raggedy, and that's what ragging the beat was. But ragging the beat became the thing, and so we create ragtime, and it's talking about the time signature of music. So when we talk about march time, that's the time signature of music. Ragtime speaks to the time signature of the music, how it's structured. So you don't have, in this country where you have this amalgamation of cultural practices, you don't solely develop your thing completely on your own. You're still going to have influence, even in the space of, if you say like the Gullah Islands, right? So the Gullah Islands were, or are a marsh land where a lot of people from Guinea who were brought down to South Carolina would be there, and because it was marshlands, they had high malaria, so enslavers would sort of stay away, which allowed the Africans to practice more of their traditional rituals and so on and so forth. And that's why it stayed intact. So when you look for the history of America, particularly to that of the African plight, New Orleans and throughout the Gullah Islands, you're going to see a richness of that cultural practice, of the language, of the dress, of the customs, so on and so forth. Even in that sense of isolation, you still will find influences that seep in, right? It's more, it's the closest we can have in America to that deep structure that we find throughout the Southern Islands, going back to Africa, because we have less involvement, but there's still going to be some levels of influence because you are still in proximity of other cultured people.
Now, I have to admit, I've heard some Black Americans say that we didn't get anything from any other group of people. That is not true. And I never said that. So I hope no one is accusing me of saying that. What I've always argued, I said influence is not creation. Okay. I can acknowledge that everybody's influenced by everything. If you're a human being, you're going to be influenced by something. But what we did in America was not a collaboration. And what we're hearing from some people, like Dr. Cologne, is they think collaboration is equal to influence. And it's simply not. We did create these things on our own with influences. Okay? I can acknowledge that. Like European culture, music, is certainly a part of the influence that went into the creations of the genres that Black Americans are known for. That's without question. But no European helped us create it. You see what I'm saying? And this is how you could establish the difference between creation and influence. Just as we were influenced by the Europeans were also influenced by us. And if that's the case, why is it that the Europeans didn't create jazz, blues, gospel, rock and roll, soul, funk? Why is that? We're both influencing each other. That proves that influence is not equated to creation. So to continue to push this narrative that we owe another group credit for our creation is stupid. It shows a level of desperation to be relevant it's almost borderline envy and jealousy. Give us our flowers that we deserve. Stop trying to tether yourself to what we've done. Create your own genres and celebrate your own accomplishments. That is what you need to do.
Big Dog has a question. He said, how much influence does the rock dance have in breaking? Not modern breaking, but breaking from the 70s, early 80s breaking.
Let me see how I can answer that. That is a question I'm still pursuing information to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
What is going on? Oh, that's desktop. I had some stuff. Let me see what I took some notes on a couple of things. Let me see what I can
Sure.
find here.
And I definitely think Frank Rojas could answer that question a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what? I was surprised that when Marcel was asked that question, he waffled on it, right? He hesitated to answer the question because I spoke to Marcel about 4 days earlier and asked him that same question. What is his opinion on the rock dance? And he didn't have an answer then, despite knowing Enoch, at least being aware of Enoch, Frank Rojas, and Willie Estrada. He still did not know the answer. And I found it odd because he's a dance historian. The fact that you could tell us about dances that took place in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century and not have any opinion on a rock dance caused me to wonder, is it possible that he doesn't want to rain on Cologne's parade? Because if he saw the documentary as he said he did, he would know that in his documentary, Cologne said this.
The original foundation, called the rock dance, is the head. And that would be the inspiration.
We spent hours and days perfecting this art form that came straight out of the Latino community.
The rock dance is the precursor to what would come to be known as floor rocking, top rocking, up rocking, down rocking, okay, going off, breaking.
Yeah.
Deeper than any of us.
Yeah, because I'm not a rocker. But hold on, what was that question again? Read that question again.
So how much influence does the rock dance have in breaking? Not modern breaking, but breaking in the 70s and early 80s.
So yeah, that's more of a question. I don't want to speak for other people. I think that's more of a question for the rockers at that time period. I'm sure you probably have some opinions about it, but I don't want to spew out my opinion on it. I would rather you hear from somebody who was actually a rocker from that time period and from that area and I think the best way to answer that is to speak to the rockers that were doing their thing and then speak to those who came right after them that were breaking and hear what they think the similarities are between what they were doing. I think that's also a conversation in the music structures and what was prevalent to really give that question the proper answer.
Marcel really struggled answering that question. To me, this was a layup. For a person who could talk about dances in the 18th, 19th, 20th century and not have an opinion on the rock dance, I was like, come on, Marcel, what is this all about? You heard Cologne say the rock dance is the precursor to breaking. Do you really believe that? I don't think you believe it. And maybe that's why you didn't want to answer the question, because you didn't want to break Cologne's heart. So you rather throw your own people under the bus so Cologne could feel good. That's how I saw it. Papa, I'm getting ready to show this video too. Papa Rojas is on record actually saying that a major part of his dance come from the Black community. And the first time he saw breaking, he did not like it. So the question begs, if it is the precursor, once you saw breaking, you should have been like, wow, they're doing an aspect of my dance. But that wasn't his reaction. So by Papa's own reaction, that tells you the dance did not come from them. Why Monsell wouldn't say it? Only he could answer that question. I actually have a portion of a video where Monsell said some years ago that breaking started in the Black American community. Why couldn't he tell Cologne that?
So let me just go back a little bit, right? So, you know, when I was doing those dances to those songs, right? It was the Black community that pretty much was the power of dance, right? But then you had the Puerto Ricans who came in, did what the Black community did because we loved it. You know, we did the groove just as good. We had the soul. We had soul, right? Yeah. So, but we also had that salsa. We had the cha-cha. Mambo. All of that. Dancing? Yeah. You know, so everybody danced in my house. You know, it was more salsa, right? Merengue, you know, cha-cha. And I dug it, and it was in my DNA. I did it. But I liked what the brothers were doing down the block a lot more. Because I was already moving on. Okay. Right? So, yeah, all this stuff was starting to happen. We saw breaking for the first time. And tell you the truth, we didn't like it. Again, change, right? You know, we like, oh, what's that?
Because you were already kind of like, when Rubber Band was just doing splits.
Right. Exactly. Well, we to us, it was gymnastics. Oh, okay. Right? That's what we called it. We called it gymnastics. We didn't, Enoch said, because like I went to Enoch and I said, look at what they're doing. And I took him to a park and he said, that's not dancing. That's not, and I was a little impressed, but when I heard him say that's not dancing, I was like, yeah. I went with
by that time you were like 18, 19, right?
Yeah, I was about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Even maybe 17, I'd say. The first time I saw breaking, I think I was about 17, so it might have been 77, 78.
But most of them went to Brazil, which is where we get the ostrich dance and the zebra dance becoming known as capoeira. There's a movement relationship where in terms of grounded movement, we see not just in Brazil, we see in the Dominican Republic, we see in Martinique, we see in Haiti, we see in Cuba, we see in Puerto Rico. So this ways of dropping to the ground is also connected to breakers because it's in terms of the Latinx community. That type of movement was prevalent coming from that cultural space that we would see in New York, blending in with what Black people were doing, and then breaking becoming a thing that started in the Black community that was, let's say, enhanced stylistically through the Latinx community that started in the Black community that was, let's say, enhanced stylistically through the Latinx community and becoming a thing.
So I'm just sharing what I do now. In terms of when we look at the cipher or the circle, which are two different things. The circle is a circle. The cipher is more of a spiritual practice. If we're looking at this, for hip hop, we're looking at the circle because of 5 percenters. And there are other scholars you can look at. I don't know if I have H. Samuel Leem's book in here, Rock the Mic Right, where he talks about if hip hop did have a religion, it would probably be Islam because of Supreme Mathematics and the influence that the 5 percenters had on hip hop.
If hip hop had a religion, it would be Islam. Who brought Islam to the inner cities of America? The Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad. foundational Black American. That would be considered the fifth element, knowledge. You add breaking, DJing, MCing, all foundational Black American creations. People want to throw in graffiti. Who cares about graffiti? Not everybody who was in graffiti was into hip hop. And even if you did include graffiti, it doesn't change the origins of hip hop itself. It's still rooted in Black American culture. When I spoke to Marcel, I even asked him about language. And I asked him, do you think, what is your opinion of the importance of language in culture? He wouldn't even answer me. You guys know I did my last video was on language. And the language of hip hop is Black American vernacular. It's not Spanish vernacular. It's not Caribbean vernacular. It's Black American vernacular. Our fingerprints is all over hip hop. It's undeniable. I can't imagine anyone who's intelligent who would argue against that. Needless to say, we have some delusional people who will do that. It is what it is. So if you haven't already, subscribe. Thumb up that video. Please thumb up the video and share. And until the next time, peace.